All right, thanks for watching, guys. This is part four in my series of basically why you should give me $1 billion. But anyway, so this one's gonna be on AI, and I'm gonna touch a little bit on AI, and then I'm gonna move like straight to like bioinformatics and stuff. So it's like increasingly evident that AI is the next space where innovation is going to take place. Duh. But this is clearly demonstrated by the prevalence of machine learning startups. And this also means that the technical investment for startups is higher. And it means that the best way to be successful now is to be excellent at math. And like you have to excel at math to ideate and build a product like this. Um, you might not need to like know all the nitty gritty and all the details, but you got to understand like what is possible, and what is possible is defined by like math, and I'm talking about like master's level, like pure math, like typically not ever useful, but suddenly in the 21st century it is. You'll notice also that machine learning startups have like similar life cycles and like characteristics. However, AI-based startups already are making me nervous. I mean, we're getting uncomfortably close to generalized and contextualized AI, and who knows where the next like major development is going to come from. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to another upcoming area of innovation, also a which is genetics. And interestingly, you're going to find that certain aspects of genetics are very similar to AI. And so I have had this like idea, like I've been taking this like epigenetics course on Coursera.org, and I recently got like a verified certificate for it. It was an amazing class. I learned like a ton about like the specific mechanisms of like genetics and epigenetics and how like changes like propagate through generations. I really can't state how much I learned about this, but it got me thinking about like uh, some possibly new ways of modeling genetics. And instead of just like modeling like you know systems of like related genes and like modeling on the small scale like interactions between related genes, you instead model the system as a whole as this kind of like probability based program. And this is actually what sparked my interest in probabilistic programming languages. So like nobody like really told me what those were. I searched them out because of this idea to model like genetics as a probability based program. I kind of wondered like, has anyone else thought of a programming paradigm like this? Like, so you've got like the functional programming paradigm, you've got the logic programming paradigm, you've got an imperative programming paradigm, but I hadn't heard of like a probabilistic programming paradigm. But apparently other people have thought about this, and it's like really actually cutting edge. But I'm actually not sure if the development there is the same thing as what I'm thinking of. And I think people like realize that the expressions of genetic behavior are programs, but we don't model it from that perspective, and instead we focus on the relationships between specific sets of genes. And maybe this idea is like more prevalent than it appears. The genetics is like a program because you have like predictable sequences and trees of behavior, but you have like spatially distributed state, which is manipulated in a predictable manner by the products and actions of a genetic expression. And then the accumulated and spatially distributed state, like variables, like the proteins, the miRNA, the piRNA, the long non-coding RNA, etc. So these physical manifestations of genetic expression, which are basically like the variables, it's like the state of your program. Um, these then influence the probability of subsequent genetic expressions. And this spatially distributed state is not strictly digital representation of information, by the way. It's like this kind of like quantum analog representation of like probabilities. So it's more like you're uh, representing something like like a Bayesian network or like a hidden Markov model or something like that, where like you never really have like you don't have like digital ones and zeros, but it's also not like pure analog because you have like the quantum like like you can like count the products. Like you can be like, okay, we have like 5 of these me RNAs, and there's like this one long non-coding RNA that has this behavior, and so it's a really interesting way of thinking about it. And like what I mean by like a probabilistic program is that like you just have like all of these like uh, you just have all these functions defined, and all of these functions in your probabilistic program have like a probability associated with them of being executed. And when they're executed, they influence the spatially distributed state. And of course, like if this was like a computer, it wouldn't be spatially distributed, but it influences like the state of the program in some way when the functions are executed. And so all your functions just have like probabilities associated with them, and they're not really like tightly coupled together. They're just like um, the probability of function 2 executing is dependent on the byproducts of you know function 1, and so you can have like all these typical like program like behaviors where so you have like function 1 that executes, then you have like the second function that executes, then you have the third function that executes, and this kind of looks like a block of code or another function in itself. And so you can like model these as sort of like it's like sort of like a tree based model, but it's like more complicated than that. It's just a really interesting way of thinking about it because you're not like strictly controlling the behavior of the program. You're just like being like, okay, program, run, and you're hoping that all this random behavior will like produce the behavior that you want. It's really complicated, but I mean it works in my head at least, and I think it'll be like extremely useful in explaining like genetics and epigenetics, and you'll find that there's like an OS layer to this abstraction of genetic behavior. So the nucleosome, which is inside the nucleus of every cell like in your body, acts sort of like the kernel, and the nucleosome provides certain core functionality in a generalized manner, so like ribosome construction and RNA transcription, and this provides like basic like necessary functions for the rest of the nucleus, without which the nucleus couldn't function, it couldn't do its job, and like the other more specialized functions of your cells like couldn't run. And so like this nucleosome is like the kernel, but then you have these other areas of transcription sites, which are more like programs running on the OS, and they can literally like encapsulate and internalize their state by controlling the spatial distribution of state by like insulating it insulating its state from the state outside. And so like as these little bubbles inside the nucleus, I can't remember what they're called, but they do exist. They'll read in like DNA, and they have high amounts of like RNA polymerase on the surface that allows it to like read in and process DNA. And you'll find that like these little bubbles like encapsulate the state and like create like a controlled environment that has that sort of like lends itself to like encouraging certain behaviors while like preventing it from affecting the state outside of the bubble. And so like you'll find like higher amounts of like transcription factors in there, and there'll be like correlated like regions of various chromosomes that get like sucked into these little bubbles, and so these like programs can like cause like state changes in the nucleus, so they can like so certain DNA being transcribed into like RNA can like encourage another specific chromosome or just like an adjacent chromosome to also begin being transcribed at a specific region and pulled into this like execution bubble. And it's really like you have little programs running inside the nucleus, like adjacent to the and then you also have the nucleolus, which provides like the most basic functions of life that evolved like 3 or 4 billion years ago. Um, and so I think this like probabilistic programming model for genetics and epigenetics is just like an incredibly powerful idea that like helps like explain how these things like how these pieces like interact with each other. I wish I did, but I definitely do have ideas. Probably gonna find that a lot of them are already accounted for, and that I probably should have just like read Newth's computer science books, and that would have like it would have saved me a lot of time. But I do have some like original ideas that I believe could be revolutionary, but unlike some of my other startup ideas, they can't be really started in a garage as much as I would like them to be. Uh, anyway, so coming up next, I'm going to be talking about like VR and AR. Haven't really touched on those yet, but I do have a ton of ideas there. I've got ideas. But I've never actually worn VR goggles, which kind of sucks. I haven't even done Google Cardboard yet. I'm sure I'll do it soon, but I've seen Oculus Rift. I don't know what I'm doing. I should really like hurry up and play around with that. But so I'll talk about VR ideas in my next video. So thanks for watching.